Hey everyone, and welcome to a special episode of the Legend Fiction Show. We are joined today by Karen Ullo. Hi Karen, how are you?
Hi Dominic, nice to be here.
So this is for our upcoming LegendHaven convention, Worlds Without End, on October 14th. Karen is the editorial director for Chrism Press, and they're all about faith-inspired fiction. Honestly, I took one look at what they were doing, had a couple of amazing chats with Rhonda and Karen in the past, and decided that's it. Legend Fiction is going to truck along with them because what they're doing is exactly what's needed. So, Karen, we're today talking about horror as a genre of the sacred. I mean, so that's just cool enough. I hope people stick around for like 2 extra minutes to hear about that. But first, I want to ask you, what's your background? You said you have a background in screenwriting. Now you write novels and you're also the editorial director. What's your story? And then let's get into our topic.
So I have a bachelor's degree in vocal performance in music, and then I have a master's degree in screenwriting from USC. And I decided I did not like Hollywood very much. So I moved back to where I'm from, to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and started writing novels instead. And as far as the editing part, I don't have any formal actual training. I'm just really good at it. I basically taught myself. And so then I was the managing editor of Dappled Things, which is a Catholic literary journal, for a little over 3 years. And then from there, I was invited to, had the opportunity to help found Chrism Press. So that is what I'm doing now. And Chrism Press, for those of you who don't know, is an imprint of Whitefire Publishing that is devoted to Catholic and Orthodox voices in fiction across all genres. And we felt that that was a niche that was really lacking, because most Catholic publishers do not publish fiction, or if they do, they only publish fiction for children. And most Christian publishers are really evangelical Protestant publishers, and may or may not be open to anything that includes elements of Catholic and Orthodox faith. But Catholic and Orthodox Christians combined make up 66% of the world's Christians. So it makes no sense to have a Christian fiction market that is excluding 2/3 of the world's Christians.
No kidding.
So we said this is something that absolutely needs to happen. So we did it.
There you go. See, everybody who's watching, all of our good friends, I told you we're not crazy. I knew there was a lot of us out there, and we need some sort of a community to come together in so that we could kick our ideas around and have a little bit of fun. Okay, so maybe a year or so ago, I wrote an article that was like, why Christians or why Catholics respect horror as a genre. And that was just me kind of brain dumping my own thoughts. And you and I were joking earlier about not having enough time to watch enough movies and stuff, and being kind of disappointed by the level of sort of horror movies that are coming out today. And
oh yeah, you're not going to hear me recommend any modern horror movies in this presentation.
Okay, so when you said horror is a genre of the sacred, not just something that we can tolerate, but is actually something that's important. So let me turn that back over to you. Why that point? Why is it a genre of the sacred?
Well, Christians tend to be very scared of horror. And I'm speaking not only of just Catholics or just Orthodox or just Protestants, but across the board. We tend to be scared of horror as a genre because we tend to think of it as the genre of the demonic and the satanic, which is exactly wrong.
Right.
I want to do a little thought experiment here at the beginning. And first of all, let me preface this by saying it is just a thought experiment. I do believe in the Bible as the inspired word of God. I'm not trying to say that it is fiction. But I want you to think for a second, if the Bible were a novel, what genre would it be? It starts off in paradise with no problems of any kind. And then a literal devil, comes in, tempts Adam and Eve to commit the first sin, and unleashes what? Horror. Unleashes murder, rape, war, plague, famine, everything you can possibly think of that is horrific is unleashed. And then you spend, like 4,000 years of biblical history.
90% of the novel.
90% of the novel
getting worse and worse.
Is horrifying.
Yeah,
it's
true.
Nothing but people trying over and over and over again to substitute something else for God. And God coming back and saying, no, guys, here's the way. Here's the way. Come on, you can do it. Here's the way. And them going over and over and over again back to war and violence. And right? And how does it end? If we take off just the tiny littlest bit before the resurrection, it ends with the death of God.
Yeah.
But then we have the biggest twist in the history of the universe when, of course, Christ rises from the dead and redeems all of this horror.
Yeah.
If that were a novel, what genre would it be?
I don't know, epic fantasy or thriller then with that ending?
It's gothic horror.
Okay.
You have because you're fighting a literal demon, right? And he's even there all the way up through the temptation in the desert and all the way up through the crucifixion. Who is there as a literal character in the novel? Satan. This automatically takes it from being just an epic, of say Homeric proportions, and turns it into a horror. This is our genre. This is our story. This is where we come from. We do not come from a fluffy bunny, everything is light and wonderful faith. We come from a faith that stares the darkness in the face and then says, we win anyway, And there is going to be a happy ending no matter what you throw at us. But it's a horror novel right up until the crucifixion and through Holy Saturday. And you have to get all the way to Easter Sunday for it to suddenly be something redemptive. Yeah. So horror is our genre. It's it's the story that we have lived and that we continue to live and that we profess as our faith is a story that is foundationally horrific, except, it's horror, except for the resurrection and the redemption and the fact that we can be saved from the horror. But, and so I want to just take that and say that because of that, if you don't have that tiniest, if you don't have that twist at the end, if you don't have the resurrection, if you don't have the light overcoming the darkness, what are you left with? You're left with nihilism.
Yeah, just doom.
Nothing matters, right? Doom. If Jesus dies, if God dies and does not rise, does anything matter?
So what's riveting about that is to take that really seriously, to recognize that is the mentality of everybody in the ancient world and all of the apostles, right up to the moment when Christ walks through the door and says, hey, anybody have fish?
Right.
Nobody expected anything different. They're kind of hoping, didn't take him seriously. And the whole ancient world, the Romans, the Greeks, you track it all the way back through the spiritual development of religion and whatever. That's the world that they lived in. Is this world of horror.
And we are wrong to simply deny and give that genre away to the atheists who are ultimately nihilists, especially if you watch. And that's why I said I'm not going to recommend any modern horror film, because they're made by and large, a secular, mindset. And so therefore they don't have the light. They don't have the answer. And all they can possibly be left with is doom.
Right.
But for us as Christians, we know the answer. We have seen the problem. So horror faces the problem of the world head on. It faces the problem of evil, which is the biggest problem in all of theology and philosophy, right? The problem of evil. And that's what horror does. Yes, of course, you can face the problem of evil in any genre. Every genre is going to have to face whatever the evil is that's presented. If it's a realistic setting, maybe the evil is war, maybe the evil is domestic abuse. If it's a fantasy setting, again, maybe the evil is war, maybe the evil is dragons, but there is an evil.
Right.
Everything, both in life and in fiction, is ultimately about solving somehow this problem of evil. And how do we get to the happy ending? But what horror does even better than any of the other genres is it can embody the evil. It can take something that is fundamentally abstract, the concept of evil, and put it into a human or a demon or a monster or whatever, whether it's the Phantom of the Opera, who is ultimately a human being, yet he is just so monstrous that he's barely recognizable as such, or whether it's the Exorcist, where you're fighting real literal demons. You can embody the problem.
Right.
And therefore it gives us a different way of approaching it. And it allows us to really see how evil acts in the world, on our psychology, and on us physically, and sort of understand the problem in a new way. That's the real genius of horror.
Yeah, and we're not talking, when we talk about horror in this sense, I think we're not just talking about like slasher thriller fiction. We're talking about stuff that's like genuinely dealing with evil in and of itself as a personal reality, as an existential sort of thing, something that we can't get around or ever actually defeat. And so maybe there's a good question. What makes a horror movie a horror movie? Can a horror movie ever have a happy ending?
Of course. Okay. Many of them do. Dracula is the classic example of horror with a happy ending. And in fact, I have, for me, the holy trinity of horror is Frankenstein, the Hunchback of Notre Dame, and Dracula. And if you have read those three books, then, you will understand why horror has to be read from a Christian perspective, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense.
It's just completely hopeless.
Skimming right now. Yeah. I'm looking for my quotes from Dracula. So this is from toward the end of Dracula. The last I saw of Count Dracula was his kissing his hand to me, with a red light of triumph in his eyes, and with a smile that Judas in hell might be proud of. So who is Dracula? He's Judas. Bram Stoker told us this. Like, horror is nothing but symbolism, and it demands to be read the same way you read scripture, where everything has a typology to it. And it's in the really great horror novels, it is typically scriptural typology outright like this. And then he writes about Mina Harker, who is the Christ-like figure. There are darknesses and there are lights, and you are one of the lights, the light of all lights. That's Professor Van Helsing speaking to Mina Harker, calling her right there, in about as blatant language as you possibly can. This is our Christ figure. She is going to be the one who redeems this story. That's what horror does, is it tells the story of salvation over and over and over again. And one of two things happens. Either there is redemption, as there is in Dracula. It's a very imperfect novel, and the theology that is very flawed, but ultimately it is a redemptive story where they do manage to redeem Dracula in a certain kind of way. Or you get the Frankenstein ending, where it's very, very clear that there was a path to redemption. Victor Frankenstein had many opportunities to turn away from his path of destruction, and they were clear in the novel, and he chose not to, which is also a very Christian thought, right?
Cautionary tales.
Because ultimately, yes, Jesus redeems us and offers us redemption, but what is hell except the rejection of it? We have that free will to reject it. And so yes, of course it's possible to have horror with a happy ending, but it's also possible to have horror with a not happy ending that is very spiritually meaningful.
Yeah, I was, like I mentioned earlier, I've been on a bit of a horror binge, sort of getting caught up in all the stuff I've missed the last 10 years, and then just being kind of, as I said, underwhelmed by the level of a lot of them. And the point that you make is absolutely right. We have a bunch of atheists, some of them are grappling.
Well.
Yeah, they don't really. Some of them do it they do things that are very interesting, that are very gut wrenching, and of course the stories are very dark, and serious things are being worked through. But I find they're underwhelming by the time you get to the end, unless you ground it back in the Christian symbolism, the sense of the sacred. Then all of a sudden the story takes on, especially when they're trying to do it seriously. Like there's a bunch of horror movies that are, they feel like Marvel drama sort of stories. But then there are some that are very dark, and they try to take themselves very seriously, and they're extremely nihilist and depressing, and they end on a horrible ending. And I come away from them thinking,
wants to deal with what's the point?
So
the whole
I would
theory
think
of
as
nihilism is that there
Christians-
is no point. So why do I want to watch it?
Well, exactly. I think the only sort of possible redeeming element to that would be, as a Christian, we could look into that thinking, if we take this as true, then there's a cautionary tale here.
Right.
There's a lesson that must be learned, like, don't bring anybody other than an exorcist into the trenches, with this sort of thing. Because you bring in somebody who has none of the credibility or the qualifications to deal with this spiritual warfare, you're going to end up with the tragic ending. And in a way, sometimes these stories then do tell a very valuable truth.
That's true. And I do want to make another point, which is that a lot of times Catholics in particular tend to steer away from horror precisely because they still depict Catholicism. And horror is the last genre where it is occasionally acceptable to portray Catholicism in a positive light.
It's impressive.
Because, and deep down in our bones as human beings and as a society, we know if you're staring evil in the face, you don't go to Pastor Bob from down the street at Grace Life Church or whatever. Who do you go to? You go to the Exorcist. You go to the Catholics. You go to the Eucharist. Bram Stoker was not a Catholic, but what are they using to fight Dracula throughout the whole novel? The Catholic Eucharist. Because we know it. It's built into our DNA through 2,000 years of Christian history that when you're staring the devil in the face, you need Christ. And now, of course, in secular horror, a lot of times they'll call in the priest and it doesn't work. But they have to go through the step.
Right.
There is no getting around the step where you call in the exorcist or at least the priest to come in and help you fight the evil. If it's not there, then you're kind of flaunting the whole genre in a way. But Catholics tend to shy away from that because they don't want to be portrayed as that crazy backward faith that still believes in, but that's who we are, guys.
Old Faithful still works. And for those kinds of stories,
that's who we are.
Yeah.
If you don't embrace the fact that spiritual warfare is real, and that when you're really in the trenches of it, you need the Eucharist, and you need the sacraments, and you need the support of a priest who has the authority to deal with these kinds of things, then you haven't really embraced Catholicism. And we really shouldn't shy away from the fact that we are portrayed as the ones who can defeat evil, because that is ultimately how we will bring people back to Christ.
I always found it so funny that exorcists are one of the lowest on the totem poles in terms of the church hierarchy. They're I think they're lower than deacons or something. And it's like, you take, for most of, let's say, the post-Christian world and so on, they've completely lost all of the hierarchy. But that one little role, you lose that too, and all of a sudden, your stories have no resolution. Like, you're left just with mind-numbing, horror. And I find it funny when they, like you say, they've got to make that point where you do bring in a priest. It's just part of the ritual of telling horror stories. even when it doesn't work in the story, I find it a bit funny that the characters in the story will be like, well, obviously it didn't work because we all know Christianity is kind of a crapshoot or whatever. But what's funny though is not even a priest is a one-hit wonder coming out, batting 100 at every exorcism. Sometimes they take months or years.
Right.
Now, obviously, that's not very fun if you're trying to do a 24-hour thriller fest. So in that sense, it's also an opportunity for good conversation, about these sort of things.
Exactly. It is an opportunity for separating the fantasy that you see on a screen from the reality of what actually happens in the Catholic Church. And that's another thing we should embrace, is the opportunity for that dialogue. Because I don't think there's anybody out there, or at least not, a well-educated person, who watches a horror movie and thinks, yes, that is exactly what a real exorcist does. If you would have to be just very credulous to think that. But it is an opportunity for dialogue and opening up the floor for, well, yes, we actually do believe in the demonic, and we do believe that you can fight it through prayer and through sacrament, and if necessary through the intervention of an exorcist. And here's why you need it. That this really is an opportunity, and frankly, in popular culture, it's our last opportunity. As I said before, it's the last place where it is still acceptable in a standard Hollywood film to portray a Catholic in a positive light.
Yeah, agreed. I didn't actually prep you in this, but I'd love to hear what you think about how exorcists are treated in a lot of these movies. And the reason why I mention this is because they seem to follow like a couple of different, well, maybe two different routes. One is they show up and they're panicking and they're yelling and they're trying to out-scream the poor subject on the bed. And they don't, it's, of course, it's a whole lot more dramatic that way, but they don't seem to be embodying any sense of authority over the situation, that spiritual authority. And then there's the other side. And actually, I thought Russell Crowe did this in the recent one, The Pope's Exorcist, which was trending for a little bit, where he showed up and he's like, he's playing Father Gabriel Amorth, but he's like joking and he's kind of relaxed. And yes, it's serious and dramatic, but once the moment's over, he just goes back to kind of being joking again. And I love that sense of the cozy kind of Italian grandfather, who's ultimately not afraid of what's going on and so on.
Well, and that's, I haven't seen The Pope's Exorcist. Like I said, I watch very, very little modern horror because it's mostly just nihilism, and what's the point? But what you're saying reminds me of the person who writes the best exorcists today, who is Eleanor Berg Nicholson. Her books are A Bloody Habit and Brother Wolf. And then because I'm her editor, I just got the newest one called Awake of Malice, which will come out next year.
Cool.
But but her exorcist is similar to that. She has a Dominican exorcist named Father Thomas Edmund Gilroy, who is not the protagonist, but definitely the hero in a way of those books. And he's a Dominican friar, and he knows the truth, which is that evil is boring. Yes. Evil cannot create. Yeah. It can do nothing except mimic good. That's the theological truth behind evil. We, in a lot of popular fiction, movies, books, whatever, the villain tends to be more interesting than the hero because you have to give them the backstory of why they became evil and all that. But that's a human, or at least a human-esque character. Maybe it's an alien or whatever. But that's because you're creating a full three-dimensional character. Evil itself is as boring as it is possible to be. Dante got it right. It's just sitting there locked in ice, chewing, mechanically. Evil
They're all
is dull.
just whining and just plastered and not doing anything and just mad.
And every sin that you can possibly confess in the confessional, the priest has heard thousands of times before, because there is nothing new about evil. And that is the genius of Eleanor's books, is that she has this very funny, very laid back, he loves puns father, and he's always smiling and happy until he has to go in and face the demons, and then he'll be very serious and get the work done. And then it's back to telling, to making stupid puns about whatever just happened, because that's the truth. If you really understand good and evil, evil's just boring.
Yeah. So, and this is my opinion. I am very leery of any exorcist out there who is grim and gritty and dour and
Yeah.
essentially fear mongering, as opposed to
Well,
being kind of this jolly, like Father Fortea is a Spanish priest. I loved the little that I know about him. He's more that kind of exorcist that I've so enjoyed following, because there's so much light, and he's so relaxed, and he's like, the Hail Mary and the sacraments, they're the most powerful things. You don't need to be worrying about this stuff.
exactly. Well, and that's the point, is a real exorcist knows the battle has already been won. His job is just to show up and say some prayers and sprinkle some holy water, but Christ did the work already.
Now, kind of going back the other way then, when it comes to crafting horror stories, you may know that that's kind of the truth, but you're crafting a story where perhaps the characters don't, or everybody is grappling with the fact that it's not. So any recommendations are how, for example, is your story horror, Jennifer the Damned?
Yeah, my debut novel, Jennifer the Damned, is definitely horror.
Can you outline that? I loved the premise for this, and was ripping through those first 3 pages and stuff. What's the premise for that novel, and how do you sort of resolve it being horror?
There's 2 ways of explaining the premise. There's the premise of what you're actually going to see on the page, which is that it's about an orphan vampire raised by nuns. And then there's the premise that I actually had in my head while I was writing it, which is that it's an adaptation of Crime and Punishment.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. So that was kind of like, so if you're looking for how it will progress, Jennifer is very much Raskolnikov, and she is going to believe herself to be set apart in her case, by the fact that she's a vampire, and therefore her crimes aren't really crimes. It's just her nature. She's like a shark or a tiger. She can't help it, She's just made to be a predator. And so her crimes are not, subjected to human law in the same way, or moral law in the same way as somebody else's crimes. It's very much Raskolnikov. And so that's kind of where my book came from. And of course, she's absolutely wrong. But it's going to take a lot of horror.
Well, if you're anybody from my generation, you have not read Crime and Punishment, so you'll have no idea where this goes.
Oh my goodness. Come on, people. Back to classics. Everybody go read Crime and Punishment. Even if you don't read Jennifer the Damned, go read Crime and Punishment. Everybody should read it. It's phenomenal.
So if you were to leave a couple of recommendations then for people who like horror, are interested by it, and perhaps are trying their own hand at it, but are afraid that it's going to get shot down and not accepted or whatever, any recommendations for those who want to get into this, writing it as a genre?
First recommendation, which is the same one I would give no matter what genre you're writing: pray a lot, because horror it can be true of any genre, of course, no matter, depending how dark you feel that the story that you're being called to write, notice that phrasing, called to write, can be very disturbing. But horror, it's going to have to be. And you're going to be called to get into the mindset of characters like Jennifer, who, like you said, they don't know the truth. And the things you're going to have to portray are very difficult. And you have to remember, first of all, you have to know where you're going. If you're writing this as a Christian, then you know the ending. You know that the resurrection comes. Or at least that your character has the possibility of redemption, because it's been offered through Christ. Like Frankenstein, they might turn away from it, but you at least know where the light is. And you know that you want to make that clear to your audience, that there is the possibility. But you're going to have to pray a lot to keep yourself grounded, and to make sure that what you're showing, you don't ever want to be exploitative for the sake of being exploitative. But at the same time, you don't want to shy back from something so much that you got your own story and you got its power. And you do have to write knowing that it's not going to be for everybody, and knowing that you will get some pushback, and knowing that there are also people who are going to really, really need this. the best feedback I've ever gotten on any of my work has been on Jennifer the Damned. And I had 2 priests separately who don't know each other. One's a Catholic, one's an Anglican, who wrote to me. The Anglican priest told me that he worked in an addiction center for teens, and he was giving Jennifer the Damned to some of the teens that he was working with to serve them in their addictions, because Jennifer is an addict. She's just addicted to blood rather than drugs or sex or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was absolutely floored. That.
Did you ever consider your book might be?
I wrote a horror novel. I didn't write something that's for addiction recovery, but that's that you have to understand. And then the second one, the Catholic priest who reached out to me, said that he actually gave this book to a young woman who was involved in an exorcism.
Wow. Okay.
And that she was using it to help her work through her own darkness.
Wow. Okay.
And is this book for everybody? No.
No.
Am I getting rich off of it? Absolutely not. But there are at least 2 souls out there.
That's wonderful.
That are better off because I wrote a horror novel.
I love your point there about you did your own work and your own adventure and your own journey, and you wrote it because you enjoyed it or you felt it was meaningful and so on. And now it then goes on to become a tool or become an experience that other people use to work through something. Because this is what I love about fiction, is that it's like you do not give the answer. It's not a textbook. It's not a catechism. The whole point is to delay the answer all the way to the end and then have the characters refuse to want it the whole way through and then struggle with that. And then in horror, it becomes more and more serious with every step. Point. It doesn't get better.
Exactly. That's the point. Is horror really shows that in a way that other genres can't, which is that if you continue to reject the olive branch, the light, whatever you want to call it, but if you continue to turn away and turn away and turn away, like Victor Frankenstein, and keep moving more and more and more towards selfishness and toward your own agenda, you're gonna, this is life or death. And it's not only life or death, it's salvation or damnation. Right. That's the thing about horror, is that in most fiction, the stakes are life or death, which is big. But in horror, it's salvation or damnation.
Which is cosmic.
It's cosmic. It's so much bigger. And that's the truth that we as Christians are trying to portray and trying to communicate to others who are not Christians, which is that it's not your life that's on the line. It's your soul. It's your eternal life, or lack thereof, that's on the line. This is bigger than life or death. And horror does that in a way that's unique, and really puts it in that cosmic context.
Agreed. There've been a couple of movies where I've just felt like this is the only genre where stuff feels like it's the most real. It's like where directors or where these actors can be really, really authentic. Well, I'm mostly talking movies because I haven't really read many horror books, but they can take things as absolutely seriously, like James Bond, for example, or any of these other thrillers. There's a point at which they will not take things seriously, but this is the one genre that goes all the way, and it doesn't stop. It doesn't matter if you don't like it. There's a lot of things you don't have to like, and you're not supposed to like, but it keeps on going because you have to face these things. It's such a powerful thing. Wonderful. Look, unfortunately, we got to end, and you are such a delight to chat with, Karen. So how first of all, how can people learn more about you? Where can they find you online? And perhaps score a copy of your book?
Sure. My website is simply my name, Karen Ullo, ULLO.com. And that will give you information about all of my books. I have 2 that are out, one that's coming in May, which I actually turned away from the fantasy horror realm and have historical fiction coming out in May. Nice. Set, of course, during the French Revolution, because you can never get away from horror entirely.
Oh, Lord. Yeah. Okay.
And so that's where you can find me. And I'm on Facebook and Twitter, or X, or whatever they're calling that thing now. I have a very unique name. So it's just, if you search Karen Ullo, that's me. There's only one.
Mhm.
And Chrism Press, of course, come check us out too. And in particular, if you're interested in horror, check out Eleanor Berg Nicholson. You can find Brother Wolf at Chrism Press. A Bloody Habit was published by Ignatius, and check out her books as well.
In terms of the because our whole community and the people kind of enjoying this event are readers and writers of faith-inspired fiction, if you were to describe faith-inspired fiction in 30 seconds, what would it be, and what kind of fiction are you looking for people to submit to Chrism?
For Chrism, we're looking for everything, but we want to see how, and your faith can infuse it literally. It can be someone struggling with their faith. It can be metaphorically, like we have a sci-fi novel called Markmaker out there where it's set among aliens who've never heard of Christ. How is this a Christian book? Go read it. It is, you know. So Christian or Catholic and Orthodox fiction, it means what it means to you, in the sense that we just want to see how God works through your imagination, through the lens of your faith. And that can be so many different things.
Fantastic. So there you go, friends. I'm going to put the links in the description. So check out KarenUllo.com, subscribe to Karen, and check out a copy of Jennifer the Damned. Have a look at Chrism Press if you're looking for new and interesting and cool books. We love partnering and sending people over to Chrism Press. Like I said, we totally ripped them off and built a community for all the people who love what they're kind of putting out, because
and we love that
agree
you
with
did
them.
that. Thank you, Dominic.
Well, like you said, 2/3 of the Christian community is in this space, and nobody knows what to do with them. And so, okay, we're going to anchor our dragons right here and start building a community around this. And that's exactly what the whole LegendHaven community is all about. It's this one day a year that's completely free. We're trying to build the biggest online convention for faith-inspired sci-fi and fantasy fiction. Catholic and Orthodox readers and writers from everywhere in the world are welcome to join us, completely free. And then all of these talks, of course, stay totally free. So check us out at LegendHaven. Links are in the description. We look forward to seeing you there. And if you're a writer, God bless you. Until next time, keep writing.